Welcome to the Business of Family, the podcast where we explore the stories, challenges, and opportunities of family businesses. I'm your host, Tammy Buss, and I'm a family business survivor, and I'm also a family business advisor. In this show, we'll be talking with family business leaders and experts to bring you insights and inspiration so you too can survive your family business journey. Whether you're a founder, a successor, a professional, or just curious about family business, this podcast is for you. So today on the show, we have Nathan Yeung, and Nathan is the founder of Find Your Audience. Now, not only is he a founder of his own company, but he also grew up in a family business. So welcome, Nathan.
Thanks for having me on, Tammy.
So tell me about your family business. So you grew up in a family business and you're not in the family business now. So tell me a little bit about that journey.
Um, so some background, we're arguably a third generation, second generation, depending on how you want to define it. Most family succession things kind of define it based on whoever's the wealth generator. Um, on a lineage perspective, we're hypothetically third, or I'm hypothetically third. And when I was growing up, I 100% wanted to be in the family business. It was like everything I wanted in life. I just felt like, I'll be honest, I think when I was younger, I felt entitled.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also had this deep sense of pride and want to continue the family legacy. So it was one, entitlement for sure. I think that just happens through immaturity and ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
But the second part was also, pride in the family, pride in what we had done. So I worked in the family business at a very early age, and I kind of went in and out, kind of directly with business partners. And all I'm going to say was it was not a fun experience.
So
Um,
was it your grandfather, grandmother who started the business, and what industry was it in?
so the family business is in real estate,
Okay.
and hypothetically, we started with my grandfather from Hong Kong, and
Okay.
hypothetically, even before that, directly in mainland China. Before we went through a period where I think a lot of people lost their assets, and we moved to Hong Kong. So we had a business even before that. So we had to kind of start over when we were in Hong Kong, and that was when a great story was my grandfather started this business renting half a desk. And
Oh,
yeah, he was renting half a desk. And I think one of the stories that sticks to me the most was he found new business relationships by going through the trash. And he was going through the trash
interesting.
to find letters. And
Hmm.
so through letters, he would find new relationships.
Interesting. First generation always has to work so hard to build the business, right? So fast forward. So the business was started in mainland China and then Hong Kong. And then did your mom or dad go in the business with your grandfather?
So my uncle and my father kind of took the reins. I think my uncle went more directly into the business in Hong Kong. My father had moved to the United States, and he's actually a trained dentist.
Oh,
Um, and so he became a fairly large real estate guy here in Canada, in Vancouver. And I wouldn't say he went directly into it, but he was entrusted to steward the family and any wealth that we had in Canada. And that was kind of his role.
so
Um,
is he still in the US or did he come up into Canada?
no, so he's in Canada. So he lives in Vancouver. So he was trained in the U.S. and then he came to Canada and then he was a dentist
Okay.
here. And essentially, yeah, I wouldn't say I don't think he would characterize his move as almost he was just placed into the business. I think Hong Kong was definitely more set up for that. There was no business here, hypothetically. It was just kind of him. And my father kind of stewarded the Canadian side of that business.
Hmm. And so is the family business still going strong?
Very, very much so.
And so you said you have the third generation. So you have is your dad and your uncle, are they still
The
partners in
second,
the
third.
business?
Yeah.
And how many third generation members are they? Family members are there?
Um, there is six. Six, yes. So it's
And is
my
there,
brother, my half sister, and my cousins who are triplets.
oh, wow, wow. So are they involved at all in the family business?
My brother was quite heavily involved in the business. He stuck it out far longer than I did and did a much better job at dealing with politics than I did. And he actually just recently left last year. So now no one's in the business
Okay. And
except
how
for my
does
father.
that, and what about, and your uncle for sure?
Yeah,
Still in the
in Hong
business?
Kong. So the
Yeah.
business units operate almost independently. So the Hong Kong side and the Canadian side are essentially two separate units.
Okay. And so your dad has the business in Canada, your uncle has the business over there. And what is their thoughts or feelings about transitioning to the next generation? Or have they thought about what their legacy is?
If So the funny thing is that Hong Kong is much run very traditionally, in the sense that it's going to be run by the family, and I think not looking at what I would call traditional Western approaches. I think there's a very specific approach that Western culture takes with family transitions and succession planning. In Canada, my father has taken a very much a Western approach, and so right now, by definition, the company is run by professional management.
Okay.
And that has been a very specific endeavor that my father has taken for his own reasons.
Hmm.
If you were to ask me, is there 100% alignment amongst the family on the West Coast in Canada? That would be up in the air. I would say there's definitely a contentious vote if there was to be one. I certainly have my own very strong perspectives of that, but my dad had very much wanted to be, and I get why my dad did this. Is he said, "Hey, my goal here is that if I'm not here and none of you are capable, then the legacy still goes on." And so it was
Hmm.
I think for him, it was the professional approach was an insurance policy, right?
Yeah, de-risking of the companies. Yeah.
Absolutely, and there's the whole statistics about how the third generation absolutely destroys businesses. It's like 72 to 73%. So I can understand the insurance policy. So that was my father's approach. Uh, Again, different opinions on whether that's good or bad. I certainly think the hybrid model is much more appropriate, and a great example is that it's like the Henkel family in Europe. I can't remember what generation they are, but it's like 6 or 7. Um, they have a very interesting governance model where the obviously generationally now the family's too large, can't
Hmm.
have everyone in that family business, but they still have family very much a part of the business, but they've structured
Right.
it in a very complex governance model
Right.
where still a lot of long-term thinking is involved with the family and has a lot of influence, but doesn't necessarily meddle down to day-to-day business operations. So it's the perfect hybrid where the family values, the family vision. This is where I get really, I'm going to get hot-headed on family vision and family value in terms of performance is like 20 plus years period. Professional management, 2 to 5 years. So you can see there's a disconnect when you look at it that way.
Hmm. Hmm. And and vision and values and alignment is very, very important. Does your dad and your brother or your uncle, do they get together? Do you have family meetings to talk about the future of the business as a whole, or because they're run so differently with tradition versus Western, is there, thought about dividing those companies? Is that a conversation? I'm not asking for details, but do you
Yeah.
talk about that as a family? Because one of the things as a family advisor is to make sure that there is alignment and whatever that happens to be. And it doesn't have to be that you're involved in the day-to-day operations, but that the business might continue for generations and generations, but not with active management from the family. So do you talk about that as a family at all? Do you have family meetings, I guess is the
So
question.
we do have family council meetings. We have family council meetings. I'm going to say anywhere between 2 to 3 times a year. And a part of those meetings is we do get corporate updates. And I think in terms of what you're speaking about, I think there are unstructured conversations that happen amongst the second generation, specifically just likely my dad and my uncle, and also my eldest cousin who is in the succession or already has a kind of almost completed succession in Hong Kong. And I do think there is some of that conversation, but I think very much so it's a brainstorming conversation versus one dictating what each of their units are doing. So I think there's a very clear delineation between what the Western family wants to do and what the Hong Kong side of family wants to do, and how they want to deal with transition and how they want to deal with the business.
Mm-hmm.
I think on business governance perspectives, there's some alignment there. Having a board of directors or a board of advisors. But I think in terms of like how we want to run the businesses and how that ties into family values, I think family values is an international thing amongst the two units. But I think in terms of the execution of that, it's still very much independent between the two units.
So do you have, do you know, I guess, or is it documented or, shared what would happen if your dad or uncle passed away? Like, has that been sort of
Uh,
settled? Like, do you know
yes,
what's going to, as of today? I mean, things can change, obviously, but do you have an
yeah,
idea of if anything like that, a catastrophe happened, like, are you thrown in? Like, what's the outcome for the third generation?
yeah. So we do. However, it's a good question on whether or not there's. I'm assuming there probably are very specific documents. The discussions have already occurred during family council meetings. Um, and my eldest cousin is fully aware as to what happens specifically if someone were to pass and his role. So, truthfully, actually, a majority of the business/family governance lands on my eldest cousin if something
Hmm.
were to happen to my father. And I think amongst themselves, the second generation and my eldest cousin, there is a very definitive process as to what happens. Now, how much of that is communicated to the family? I think it is only communicated to the family once it's set in stone. So I think,
So
and
you
for
don't have
anyone
any
that's listening,
input as a family to talk about,
uh,
because there's six of you, right? And there's two second gens and six third gens. Do you not come together and have alignment or be able to voice your concerns, to your dad and uncle about where the six of you see or want to see this family business go?
so actually that just kind of happened. So my eldest cousin came here and did actually interviews with everyone to get individual feedback so that he can come back with a proposal. So I think very much the way it works is the family is not told until something's set in stone. And as many that's listening or going through these challenges, I'm sure you're aware, no family model or framework gets implemented, one for one. It's a very much an iterative process. So I'm sure there's like a 90% product out there in the sense of like process as to exactly what happens. And when that gets fully communicated to us, I don't know because that 10% could last forever.
Right.
But I'm sure that if something were to happen, we already have very much a plan in place, but it's likely a plan that still has some loose ends, but they're not material loose ends that would impact or change anything.
Right.
And we're kind of, I think certainly on some of these planning things we're kind of told on an as needed basis. We
Do you
we
do you
do
think
have
that do you think the reasoning for that is cultural? The West versus, the culture that you grew up in is, do you think that that plays a part in these decisions? Because you're very much Western focused and open and communicative. And is it because that's the process and that's the way it's been done? And culturally, this is how it's going to work?
uh if I were to answer that truth, I think it's just not communicated because I feel like likely the second generation just feels like even if we had input it would be meaningless.
Okay, so
um
that's no different than anybody else then.
yeah, it's kind of like when you're running a business and it's like, oh, by the way, we changed the insurance policy, and everyone's in the company like, why did you change our benefits? It's like, well, we didn't think it was going to do anything. It's not going to change your life. Like things will go on as is. Like we don't,
Mhm.
so there's certainly times where we are allowed or afforded a forum for
Mhm.
discussion. If you were to ask me how much that discussion means anything at the end of the day, I'd say, put a grain of salt on that.
Mhm.
Um, I sometimes, and I think a lot of times when you go through this process, it's all great, and I'll be the one. I'll be very much the one. I had a terrible relationship with my father growing up. For a period of time, he and I were not talking, and I would characterize my relationship with him as non-existent. It was toxic at one point in time. So this whole succession planning process has been a blessing. Our relationship's great, and we have one now. However, I do find sometimes that when we do these family council things and we have quote unquote these open and safe forums, I do feel like there's still a lot of politics and pleasantries. I still feel like it's the house of cards. We all like to say that we are open and honest. However, are we really? I'm going to say no.
Yeah. Are they
Do we
led by
try?
a third party, or is it your dad or uncle who leads the meetings?
Oh, yeah, no, it's definitely by third party.
Okay,
I
I was
feel
gonna
like
say,
I feel like
'cause
the
that would be very
likelihood of
tough.
a family council meeting not turning into a yelling match without a
Yeah.
third party would be unlikely.
And so was that part of the reason that made you leave the family business was your relationship with your dad, or what was the catalyst that made you leave the family business and start your own business?
I'm not going to name any names, and I can't remember. There's that rule. You're not allowed to say anything in family succession planning or coaching.
What
Um,
happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, that kind of thing?
it,
The Vegas
uh,
rules?
no, there's something kind of cool. My brother's a family succession coach now, and so he gave it to me. But the long story short is let's just say an individual in the company destroyed our relationship and did so very very much with intent.
Okay. And so
And
you left and you started your own company?
yeah, I left and I just did my own thing, and I've been doing my own thing for quite a long while. And that was just because I no longer saw any opportunity to work for the family business. So now it's this really awkward conversation of I'm getting to of age, and I have what I would consider enough worldly experiences, and it's this weird thing where it's like, okay, well, I have to have these awkward conversations to the family where I have to go, if you think at all that you want me in the family business, you need to let me know, because I have now 25 plus employees today, 3 to 4 years now. I don't know if that's going to be 40 or 50. And if you actually want me in the family business, you're going to need to tell me today, because I have
Or the
responsibilities
opportunities, or
outside of the
lay
family.
out the opportunities for you?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, do you
And
have children of your own?
I do, I have a little daughter. She's 2 years and 9 months.
So I'm not that she's ready to come into the family business, but your relationship and growing up in the family business, would that change how you're going to treat your children moving forward?
Yeah, yes. Yeah. I've always wanted to have an opportunity to learn. I remember one time I asked my dad when I was younger, I was like, just let me sit in the boardroom and just let me sit in the corner. Like, please let me sit. Just, and then I think one of the comments by the individual, of which I'm going to say I very much dislike, the comment was, why would we do that? And why would we let you in these conversations? And
Clearly
I
not a family member.
I kind of just rolled my eyes, because it's like I speak to my stepfather, who's also a C-suite member at another firm. I speak to my dad. I speak to a lot of my friends, all from C-suite or senior levels. I was like, you do this because you're sharing learnings.
Well,
And
it's
yes,
yes, mentoring, it's learning, and particularly in a family business, so that you can see the impact and the decisions you make and opportunities. It's very important to engage early.
absolutely. And I am afforded that opportunity, yes, because I am family. Like, that was just a fact. I'm also afforded that opportunity because as a family member, you likely know that I would stick with confidentiality. I can understand why you don't take a kid off a street and put them into a boardroom meeting, because if you don't know who that person is, then you don't know what they're telling people. I can understand that.
Mhm.
So there's an inherent level of trust that comes with being a family member, which allows you, especially if you're related, afforded these opportunities. Now, can a random kid probably get into a room and do this? Yes, absolutely, if you're that aggressive.
Mhm.
But I wanted to learn, right? And I've said this to my cousins. I've said this to even people at the gym. I was like, hey man, I know you're figuring out, if you ever want to sit on a call with me, you let me know. Just sit on a call, because I go, there's no harm. You sitting on a
Mhm.
call, what are you going to do? Sell my secrets? You're 16. You're not going to build a business overnight. And if you can, shame on me. Shame on
Mhm.
me. right? And so I would teach my daughter everything she wants. She wants to sit on a call, you get to sit on a call. As
Mhm.
long as you don't make it, do something that's embarrassing, interrupt, or it's obvious things. I see no harm in someone just being a fly in the wall.
Mhm.
And I openly allow anyone to do that. So that's what I'm going to do for my daughter. If my daughter wants to see a business deal, I'll show her the business deal. My daughter wants to understand how to underwrite a real estate deal, I'll show her my underwriting model. My daughter wants to understand how I do marketing for some of the largest firms in Canada, I'll show you the entire model. You tell me what you want, you ask me questions, I'll tell you how I do it. I was not afforded that with my father.
Mm. And
My
that's
father's a
and
man of
that's huge.
little.
We talk about that is, making sure, and that a lot of times when the first generation though, they don't realize it's a family business, so they don't do that till later on. But when you've already transitioned once and it's a second gen, you've been through a process, you have some processes. They might not be perfect, but you do now have a bit of a roadmap that says, you know what, this is a family business. Let's engage and get the next gen involved and involved early to understand and see the opportunities and also learn about your kids and their skill sets and their interests and where they can benefit. Because one of the things that I think we forget sometimes as, the older generation or the founders is that a lot of ideas come out of the next generation because we kind of get stuck in our ways a little bit. And what grew the business to where it is today is not going to get it, further. You need some new ideas. And that's where it's really important to look at the younger generation, to the next gen, to actually come up with ideas. And they don't all have to be great, but sometimes there's a little nugget in there that just might help or push forward that business, right?
Absolutely, Tammy. And I think one of the things that I was just on a trip in Europe in Saint Tropez talking to a Russian family, and I always hear this is like a lot of people have issues with their parents, which is common, and 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 the thing that I also explain a lot is this idea of vertical knowledge transfer versus horizontal knowledge transfer, and how I always explain to a lot of my friends and also colleagues. I was like, our parents were probably one of the last generations where vertical knowledge transfer was a rule, meaning it was very unlikely for you to ever be smarter than your parents in one thing until very, very much later in your life. Um, my daughter, if I push her hard enough by the age of 5, could likely program better than I can. Like that's the difference now in the sense of knowledge transfer.
Mhm.
It's no longer vertical.
No.
Your children could very much well be very much smarter than you. Whereas in my father's generation, I can understand why he doesn't look at me like a professional colleague.
Mhm.
I'm his son, and I am
Yes.
XYZ younger than him. There is no way in his world view that I could be smarter than him in one area,
Right.
because he's not, hypothetically in his brain, I'm sure to a certain extent he was never going to be smarter than his dad in certain areas either. And so it's hard for them to bridge that gap.
Mhm.
And that's the gap they talk about succession planning. It's that transition from being a child to a
Yes.
friend to an
Yeah.
adult.
And that generational gap, right? You got to remember what shaped your dad, what shaped you, and they have to be cognizant of that instead of picking on, well, those millennials or those, you know, Zers or whoever it is, but to embrace their knowledge and
Yeah.
embrace what they can bring to the business. And I think that's a mind shift that, um, you know, it's hard for parents to do because you are our kids, you'll always be our kids, and it's hard to get past that. But as a real business owner and a real family business person, and if you want this business to continue and succeed, and that's to be your legacy, you have to get over that. You have to get over yourself because you're causing your own blockage by not opening up and being able to talk to and bring in those ideas. Because I'm sure that if there was a person who was a similar age to you, was not his son, that he would probably listen to them more than you because again he brought you up, he's seen all your good sides, your bad sides. He remembers when you were 6 and did silly things, and they don't have that history with a stranger, right?
Yeah,
So it's one of the
absolutely.
things that again is really very important for the older generation to embrace in the next gen. We're almost out of time. I do have a couple of questions. What is your 3 pieces of advice? So I want your top 3 pieces of advice you would give to next generation members in any family business to avoid some of the stressors that you faced along the way. So top 3 tips so the next gens can avoid some of the stressors that you had.
Oh, that's a good question. I think one of the things that kids are terrible at, and I think this just happens because you grow up, is get in the habit of calling your parents for no reason.
Mhm.
And I didn't recognize this till I was much older. And to be honest, I can see this happening with my own daughter, where I will be trained through Pavlov's conditioning of the fact that my daughter will call me when she needs something. And that creates a very interesting relationship.
Mhm.
And if you want to bridge that gap, you have to get in the habit of calling your parents for no reason except to see how they're doing.
Mhm. I
And
love that.
and
I think that should be the number 1 tip for everybody, regardless if you're in business or not.
yes, but I think as a child-parent relationship, it becomes very normal. And I just recognized that when I was calling my dad would pick up and be like, "What do you want?" And I'm like, "Can't I call you to like see if you're not dead, Dad?" And he's like, "Oh, okay." I was like, "Yeah,
No, because that's why you always call. There's something wrong. Absolutely. I get it.
yeah." I was like, "I just want to see what you're doing." "Oh, I'm going to lunch." I was like, "All right, where?" "Downtown." "Okay, with who?" "Oh, so and so." I was like, "Okay, well, I'm going to be downtown. Do you want to have coffee afterwards?" Right? And so, uh, that I think is something to be mindful of. I wish maybe I should have done that earlier, but you know that comes with age. Uh, the the second thing that I would do is leave the nest early. I think if you're having a hard relationship with the family, staying in the same city is not actually going to help. And I think that's also just because it's very easy for that relationship to very much control a lot of part of your life so that of your life that you're probably not aware of. And I wish I had left Vancouver earlier. When I left Vancouver and I stayed away from Vancouver for several years, I think in terms of just personal development and also my views on the relationship matured dramatically faster than I think they would have ever matured when I was in city. So I think if you have a tough relationship, I'm saying tough. Okay, so if you're having a great relationship, stay with your parents. If you're having a tough relationship, I'm going to say leaving is probably the best thing you can do.
You see, one of my sons stayed here, and one of my sons, I'm in the Toronto area, and one moved to Victoria. So that's very clear now. Thanks for
Yeah,
pointing that
and
out.
it's you can see the forest from the trees. It's kind of hard to
Yes,
see it when you're inside the forest.
absolutely.
And so one of the last pieces of advice, which is more actually from my recent relationship issues, is recognize that everything your parents are doing to you is a form of them wanting to be heard. And if you were to be able to stop yourself from reacting, and if you thought about it like that, what does that mean and how does that change your perspective? And I think that's something where a lot of the times you'll come to the conclusion that it's not great behavior, but it's their version of being heard. And you have to recognize that whatever they're doing has been done for a reason, whether that's through trauma or their own experiences or their family upbringing, of which they are unlikely to really communicate with you very well because of that dynamic. They don't want to share their parental challenges with you.
Mm.
Um, and make a choice. Your choice is you're patient because you're far more equipped to deal with that trauma and healing, or as actually one of my best friends, Natasha, has just taught me, manage down that relationship and just lower the expectation.
Mhm.
But going against the grain will do nothing but make that relationship harder for you. And you know, I do keynotes on Succession and I openly talk about what happened between my father and I because, yeah, I hated him, but I didn't want to.
Hmm.
I don't want, and I wouldn't want any other family member to feel disowned from their family. It's
Hmm.
not a good it's not a great feeling.
No,
It's a
no,
terrible feeling. So I would hope that you can manage your relationship so you never get there. And
that's
and I think
amazing.
that's really important.
That's great, great advice. I really appreciate you sharing that. Now I have one question for you. Tell me, give me a Coles Notes synopsis of Find Your Audience. So this is your new business. Tell me a little bit about Find Your Audience.
So it kind of came about because I was doing a lot of C-suite work, and what I've recognized that hiring your first marketing person is probably one of the most challenging things for most organizations. It's also the one that's really fraught with problems because it's hard to find an individual who has so many tactical skill sets. So I've designed a business where we're going to be your best first hire you'll ever receive. And that's because we'll do everything from strategy to creative to your demand generation, digital ads, but more importantly, because you have access to fractional talent within us. So we cost the same as a manager with 3 to 5 years worth of experience. But rather than getting a manager that only is good in 2 or 3 skill sets, you're going to hire us. You get strategy, you get SEO, you get your content, you get your creative, but you get it when you need it, because the reality is that no company actually does all of these things right away. So you get the best talent required for your current needs as you scale. So we position ourselves as the outsourced marketing department. We work with like Constellation Software, the largest software company in Canada. We've been through multiple exits now with a couple companies. So my whole thing is I help build marketing functions from scratch. That's our whole thing, and we solve the headaches because marketing is a headache. It's
It,
a big
it
headache
it's
for
an
a lot of
it's
people.
necessary, it's necessary, but it's again, you all have strengths, and generally marketing, if you're an entrepreneur, maybe marketing is not one of your strengths. You know what you want to do, but you just need that help. Or you could be at an age that you don't really understand the marketing concepts these
Yeah,
days.
exactly.
So if someone wanted to reach out to you and find a little bit more about Find Your Audience, where could they find you?
Yeah, they can just go to our website, which is www.findyouraudience.online, or I think the easiest thing is just find me on LinkedIn and shoot me a message.
Excellent. So it's Nathan Young, Yeung. So thank you very much, Nathan, for joining us today.
Thanks, Tammy, for having me on.
If you like this episode, subscribe to the Business of Family podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can also find BlueRoots on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. On the next show, I'll be back with another amazing guest who will inspire you with their family business insights. Until then, take care and keep it in the family. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, tax, investment, or insurance advice. Before acting on any advice, please contact your personal or company advisors.